A direct retaliation from the army of undead for the invasion of the underground Tsitsu subway station was inevitable. However, what no one expected was the degree and level of consistency of their counterassaults in just a few hours in. At this moment, the AI system of the shelter issued an urgent warning to everyone in the shelter. Warning! Warning! The shelter is under attack. The current damage level of the shelter is 0.00001%. The attack is ongoing. Please solve the damage problem in time. Zhang Yi was awakened from his sleep at that moment. What? The shelter is under attack? Could it be that those zombies are here again? Thinking of these questions, Zhang Yi didn't deem it much of a threat immediately after a considerable thought. The reason being that the zombies, based on their means of attack, it was impossible to cause any real harm to the shelter in a short period of time. But upon witnessing what was happening outside that early morning, his expression immediately changed. At that moment, Zhang Yi, with a nervous look, saw a dense array of claws clinging continuously to the shelter's window. It was the mutated rats that they encountered from the depths of the underground Tsitsu subway station. The window in front of him had been completely covered with a mischief of mutated rats. These giant rats had never appeared before. But from the scene outside, it seems like these rats had joined the fray due to a large number of their comrades killed by Zhang Yi and his team hours ago. Also, the investigation team of Radiant Prosperity Base were no different. As a result, these giant rats had simply joined forces with the zombies to attack. Outside the shelter's compound was the army of undead, excluding the sentinels, together with the mutated rats. Their vast numbers swamped the shelter's compound from all directions as they charged towards the outer walls of the shelter in full force. Their loud chirping from the window made Zhang Yi cover his hurting ears. He thought that the mutated rats were indeed a group of tough beasts. And from the looks of things, these giant rats had no special skills in other aspects. But their teeth were extremely sharp and could even bite through a military combat uniforms with ease. Therefore, with the shelter surrounded by these guys, they will certainly make an impact on the shelter's defenses. Zhang Yi's scalp was a little numb. According to the number of these giant rats, although their attacks would not allow the shelter to be breached in a short time, but water droplets dripping on the rocks of the shelter would wear away over the years, and they would definitely gnaw a big hole in the shelter. Even if they couldn't bite through it, they would make the outer wall full of holes. Through the cameras outside, Zhang Yi had also seen that these gnawing machines were busy doing the same thing at every part of the outer wall they've encountered. He knew that increasing the offensive was nothing more than the Corpse King's constant probing and need of collecting intelligence. If things continue, Zhang Yi and his family will only become more and more passive. And as for taking the initiative, they had to wait for 2 more days. Also, as long as the number of zombies were large enough, they couldn't be wiped out at once. There will always be zombies that could flee and convey all their enemies' fighting methods to the Corpse King. In the long run, the Corpse King will become smarter and smarter, and his army will also become stronger by extension. Although the addition of the mutated rats had made things troublesome, they were not unsolvable. Zhang Yi immediately called Chunlei, Uncle Yu and Liang Yu. They needed to go outside to deal with these unwanted intruders. Half an hour later, with a considerable amount of effort by the team, the rats were almost wiped out, and more than half of the zombies were killed also. The rest fled in the direction of Tsitsu subway station, staring at the pile of corpses of the mutated rats. Zhang Yi, still with an uneasy feeling, said, "If these giant rats continue to be allowed to attack the shelter, it may take up to 2 years, give or take, for them to breach the outer wall of the shelter." He then turned around towards the shelter and gave the order for everyone to head back into the shelter. They needed to prepare. This should all come to an end possibly in 2 days' time. Meanwhile, at Morning Dew Base, they had abandoned their base at the port and taken refuge on their giant ship at sea. In order to avoid the relentless attacks of the zombies, the port had to be abandoned temporarily. In the past few days, everyone gradually discovered that the actions of the zombie wave had become more and more regular, and even had discipline like the army. Although abandoning the port meant they will lose a large number of materials in the containers ashore. But only by keeping the giant ship can they achieve long-term development. Seeing this, Wei Dinghai couldn't help but smile. He thought the other forces did not have such advantages as his base did. And on top of that, it seems that the casualties of the other forces would be quite heavy. The scene shifts to the Snow Worship Sect. And true to Wei Dinghai's analysis, the Snow Worship Sect seemed to have survived another wave of assault. And although their casualties were quite heavy only this time around, the invasion had also brought a huge benefit. The members of the Snow Worship Sect, who hadn't had meat in ages, were delighted. They began to drool upon seeing the sheer number and sizes of these mutated rats. These rats, as big as cats or puppies, could be enough for one person to eat for several days after being killed. At this time, they didn't care that these giant rats may carry viruses. Their fear of danger were completely masked by their eagerness to have a full meal with meat, a full juicy rat meat at that. Back at the shelter's compound, 2 days had passed by like a bullet, and Zhang Yi and his team were outside. So with a nervous anticipation, Zhang Yi took out his little experiment. And as he crouched down for inspection, the result was a success. The huge amount of seawater had already completed the basic precipitation. A large amount of white salt was precipitated. Zhang Yi extracted these salts full of impurities. At this time, the salt content in these seawaters was relatively low. Although there was still a certain gap from fresh water to seawater, it was easier to freeze. Now Zhang Yi could implement his plan. Lu Karen had also prepared dozens of barrels of coagulant for him. In addition to these, there were also a large number of explosives. Zhang Yi got up, and with a fierce determination in his eyes, he told everyone to hurry and get ready to set off. They had no time to waste and needed to implement their plan as soon as possible. The team didn't go directly to the subway station in Tsitsiu Jiayuan City, but first went to the terminal station, Songzhuang, which was in the direction of the underground Tsitsiu subway station. And in order to completely freeze these zombies and rats to death underground, they must first block all their retreat routes. Therefore, the first step in their plan was to completely blow up Songzhuang Station. At a safe distance, Chunlei told Zhang Yi that the explosives were all set. So when Zhang Yi received the go-ahead, he pressed the detonator without hesitation. Then, accompanied with a loud boom, the immediate vicinity was engulfed in a sea of flames. The ground collapsed quickly after. The ice, snow, and the underground mud buried the subway station deeply. Chunlei walked up to Zhang Yi with concern. "Boss, if you do this, what if the Corpse King discovers the danger in advance and runs away?" Hearing this, Zhang Yi just smiled, then made a gesture with his hand, not bothered at all if that happens. It would be best if it ran away. After all, his goal from the beginning was not to kill the Corpse King. He just want to make sure there is no one around the shelter that can threaten their safety. So as long as it is not near the shelter, it doesn't matter to him whether it is dead or alive. Hearing this, Liang Yu frowned and said with some concern, "But if all other human forces are wiped out, then the entire Tianhai city will be occupied by zombies and rats. Can we really stay out of it?" As a teacher, Liang Yu's thinking is always more detached and advanced. Her concern was typical of her. So when Zhang Yi heard this, he just smiled and explained that Liang Yu seemed to be thinking too much. If they were to go by her notion, then the deeper you think about it, the more serious your fear will be. And if what you say is true, perhaps one day the entire Blue Star will be destroyed by the virus. What can we do then? After all, our abilities were only enough to protect ourselves. It was definitely enough to think about your own living environment first. As for other things, we can only leave it to fate. We don't have such powerful abilities to think about everything at a higher level. If you are successful, you can help the world. If you are poor, you can only take care of yourself. However, what I care about most now was the latter. Then Zhang Yi walked up to the entrance of the underground Tsitsiu subway station. He opened his dimensional door and poured out a huge amount of seawater along the subway entrance. The huge amount of seawater rushed forward madly along the narrow tunnel. At this speed, it only took a couple of minutes to completely release the seawater and flood the entire tunnel. The rats in the subway may be able to sense the crisis and flee in advance, but most of them will be drowned by the water or even frozen to death in it. As for the dormant zombies, when they don't encounter living people or receive commands from the Corpse King, they will not wake up no matter what happens. All Zhang Yi has to do is to get rid of most of the zombies and rats. Even if there are a couple that slip through the net, as long as the number is small enough, they will not pose any threat to Zhang Yi and his team. In the subway tunnel, the surging flood kept washing everything in its path, and the water was getting bigger and bigger, like a rushing river during a flood season. The flood gradually submerged the rats hiding in the cracks of the tunnel. The giant rats screamed in fear, and then hurried to the place where the flood did not cover. But how could they run faster than a flood? Soon a large number of rats were submerged. It also submerged the zombies dormant deep in the wet and muddy tunnel. Deep in the subway, the zombies seemed to have received some kind of guidance and began to wake up. However, even if the zombies have stronger physical strength than humans, they cannot maintain the stability of their bodies in the tide. They were soon washed away and toppled like broken wood. The flood was getting bigger and bigger, and the entire tunnel was slowly submerged. Then Zhang Yi began to open the coagulant that Lu Karen made for him. Many large blue barrels. After opening them, a transparent liquid was poured out from them. After the coagulant was poured into the water, the purified seawater began to condense into ice at a speed visible to the naked eye. The ice layer spread rapidly toward the depths of the water. Those zombies and giant rats that were still struggling in the water were soon frozen solid. Hours passed in a flash. The entire secondary canal line was now completely frozen. Zhang Yi clapped his hands. Now our problem has been solved. It doesn't matter if some zombies and giant rats escape. It doesn't matter if the Corpse King and his bronze-armored sentinels survived. They pose no threat to Zhang Yi and his team with their current number and power, even if they may all be elites. Zhang Yi and his team can easily kill them. We should be at ease for a while. As for the troubles of the remaining zombies and rats, let other forces worry about it. Let them deal with the headache. Zhang Yi said this to everyone with a smile. Uncle Yu, Liang Yu and Chunlei looked at each other and smiled with ease. Unexpectedly, Zhang Yi had solved this huge problem with such a simple method. Uncle Yu couldn't help but sigh. Your dimensional space ability is really abnormal. At this moment, Liang Yu asked, what should we do next? What should we do? Zhang Yi repeats with a smile. His entire demeanor speaks like the answer should be pretty obvious. What else can we do? Of course, we have to beat up the fallen dogs. Zhang Yi has always been cautious in doing things, and he will not leave any chance for the other party to counter. Although the entire subway tunnel has been frozen, there must be some remnants of the defeated army who have escaped from their demise. And those who can escape, except for some who are lucky, the rest are definitely those with strong vitality. Whether it's zombies or rats, anyway, these things are very threatening to us. Since we are here, we can't leave empty-handed. It's always good to kill more. Zhang Yi took out a spray gun and loaded the bullet with a click. He then raised the gun, turned to his team and said, let's go. We'll kill as many as we can, and then do one last cleanup. After that, we'll call it a day. No one had any objections. And after watching Zhang Yi almost single-handedly wiped out the zombies and mutated rats from the sidelines, the three were restless, itching to join in, even if it was just to clean the lucky survivors up. So the team quickly made a mad dash for the giant pit that led to the subway entrance. Around the giant hole, the group were not surprised to find a couple of zombies and mutated rats fleeing from the scene. Although their number wasn't exactly expected, they didn't pose any threat to the group. So, in less than an hour, the team eliminated any survivor they could find without breaking a sweat. Meanwhile, at an undisclosed location in the suburban snowy field, 7 or 8 huge copper-armored sentinels of the Corpse King crawled out of the subway pit. Then, soon after, a short humanoid creature covered with white fur did the same. Gritting its teeth in anger, the creature was pissed that the tunnel was completely destroyed. No one could imagine that this thing that looked plain and had no fighting power would actually be the Corpse King who commanded the entire subway tunnel full of undead. At this time, the White Corpse King looked at the subway tunnel that was completely submerged in ice water. There was a trace of confusion in its eyes, because the information it gathered was to continuously cultivate the zombie group in this place. Then expand the scale and finally kill all the humans in the shelter in the southwest. But now, the entire subway tunnel has been completely destroyed. The army of undead it cultivated with great effort has also been almost wiped out. And the remaining part of the zombies cannot form a large-scale zombie army at all, let alone attack the human shelters. At this time, it doesn't know what to do next. 4 huge copper-armored corpses, his sentinels, surrounded the Corpse King in the middle. They lowered their heads and waited for the order of the Corpse King. Without the order of the Corpse King, they will not act most of the time unless they encounter a living person and have a stress reaction. After a long while, the Corpse King's brain seemed to be restarted suddenly. It made a decision, that is, to turn around and walk step by step towards the distant north. The remaining bronze-armored sentinels followed closely behind, step by step towards the north, walking slowly against the ice and snow. Meanwhile, at Radiant Prosperity Base, Xiao Honglian was ruthless. She ordered her soldiers to dig deep trenches around the base and then dump a large amount of crude oil into them. Whenever the zombies and rats attack, they directly ignite the crude oil in the trenches. Immediately, a 5-meter-high wall of fire appears that covers the entire refinery. The blazing fire burned many zombies and rats to death. After all, flames was the most effective means of eliminating the zombies and rats. With fuel being extremely scarce nowadays, it was considered as one of the 4 best resources to have and manage. However, in the case of Radiant Prosperity Base, it was very luxurious for Xiao Honglian to do this. After all, with no working government, who can stop her from using more oil resources however she wishes? Also, they can fully afford this consumption. The scene then shifts to Emerald Waterside Base, and it seems that the current situation was not ideal for Xing Tian and his men. They were able to withstand 4 or 5 battles at most. However, the relentless and countless zombies appearing every day was impossible to keep up, and soon, their strength was severely depleted. So much so that later, Xing Tian had to lead his remaining men to hide in the depths of the base. Xing Tian's last resort was to hide first, and then come out from underground after these zombies disappeared. It didn't matter if they left the steel mill equipment to the zombies for the time being. After all, the zombies didn't know how to use equipment, nor destroy them. These living dead were only interested in human flesh. Back at Luck Manor, specifically in the shelter's lounging hall, Yang Xinxin, with a laptop on her lap, called out to Zhang Yi. "Big brother, there is a very important email that you need to read." She then handed over the laptop to Zhang Yi to take a look, who did so with evident curiosity.